According to Aristotle, happiness is not just an emotion one feels, but rather something that one achieves through action. Aristotle believes that the only way to be happy is by fulfilling one's function. This function of a human being is rational activity of the soul in accordance with virtue. While I disagree with Aristotle on what the function of a human being is, I agree that to be happy, one must act rationally in accordance with virtue. In this video, we'll be discussing Aristotle's argument and those points with which I agree and disagree. First, we'll uncover Aristotle's function argument and its surrounding details to build a foundation for the rest of the video. The following section will discuss Aristotle's reasoning behind his argument and how he concluded that the function of a human being is rational activity of the soul in accordance with virtue. Finally, I'll lay out my thoughts on Aristotle's argument by pointing out parts of his argument with which I agree and parts with which I do not agree. Aristotle begins the Nicomachean Ethics by declaring that he is not only discussing ethical philosophy, but political philosophy as well, because the aim of a political theorist is to discover what will make a community of people happy. To discover what makes a community of people happy, one must first discover what makes an individual person happy. Aristotle argues that one can know what makes a person happy if one understands their purpose. If a human being fulfills their purpose or function, then they will be happy. Aristotle's use of the term happiness has a different meaning than how we use happiness today. For Aristotle, happiness is a synonym to eudaimonia. Eudaimonia is derived from eu, which means well, and daimon, which is in reference to a minor spirit or divinity. From this etymology, one can deduce that eudaimonia has a connotation of blessedness, which means that for one to live a eudaimonious life, they are living in a state of blessedness rather than a state of pleasure or content. Now that we have described Aristotle's idea of happiness, we must ask ourselves how one achieves this level of happiness. What is this function that he declares all humans share? Aristotle does not answer this question right away, but instead answers what happiness is not. The topic of wealth is Aristotle's first target. According to Aristotle, wealth does not bring about happiness, only temporary pleasure. Without any idea of what to do with one's wealth, one will live a life of misery. Aristotle points out the misconception that wealth does not bring about happiness, but one's using of wealth in the right way does. Therefore, one must look not to wealth for happiness, but the characteristics that allow one to know what to do with wealth. Aristotle next examines a life of honor, another characteristic that people believe brings happiness. He first asks what we value more, the reason why we are honored, or the state of being honored. If it is the latter, then what if one is honorable because of admiration from bad people, such as liars and crooks? What if one is honored even though one knows one is not an honorable person? Aristotle determines that it is more important to value why we are honored than the state of being honored. This means that honor is not the final goal, but more of a means to an end. Like wealth, the characteristics that bring about honor are more important than being honorable. Aristotle concludes that happiness must be an end in of itself, rather than a means to an end. By making these conclusions about what happiness is and what it is not, Aristotle determines that happiness is about living a life that brings about honor and wealth, rather than the state of being honorable or being wealthy. But what is this life? Aristotle believes that this life is found in the function of a human being. Because humans have a function, Aristotle argues that the happiest person is one who fulfills their function. According to Aristotle, everything in the universe has a purpose that differs from one another. This must mean that humans have a purpose different from everything else. Aristotle concludes that the purpose or function of a human being is rationality, because this characteristic sets us apart from all other beings. Now that Aristotle has concluded that the function of human beings is rationality, he must now determine the best way of living a life as a rational person. Aristotle determines that the best way to live a life of rationality is to have rational activity of the soul in accordance with virtue. Virtue, according to Aristotle, means excellence. Therefore, to achieve the level of eudaimonia, one's actions must be conducted with excellence. A question that may arise after understanding Aristotle's view on happiness is, can everyone achieve eudaimonia? Unfortunately, Aristotle does not think so. Because Aristotle defines happiness as rational activity of the soul in accordance with virtue, one cannot be happy if they are not able to achieve excellence. Aristotle believes that every act one commits in life must be done with excellence in order to achieve eudaimonia. This means that one must have an excellent level of honor, wealth, health, skills, and relationships, and anything else one pursues. If any one of those are missing, Aristotle does not believe that one can be happy. Now that we have discussed the function argument and its surrounding details, let us discuss the reasoning behind Aristotle's argument. One might question the need for things in the universe to have a function. Aristotle has two major reasons for believing that everything has a function. Aristotle's first reason for believing that everything has a function comes from his four causes. According to Aristotle, everything in the universe has four causes: material, efficient, formal, and final. The material cause of something is what materials were used to create the object. For example, a material object of a bottle would be glass. The efficient cause would be whoever created the object. For example, the efficient cause of a painting would be a painter. The next two causes get to the reasoning behind Aristotle's function argument. They are part of the foundation that his argument rests upon. The formal cause is the characteristics that are present in that object that make it what it is. For example, the formal cause of a human being would be rationality. This cause is what Aristotle uses to formulate his idea that the function of humans should be different than other things in the universe. Because the formal cause of humans differs from other beings, the final cause is the purpose of something. For example, the final cause of a pencil would be to write. The final cause is what Aristotle uses as a foundation to argue that everything has a purpose. Another reason Aristotle has for believing that humans have a function is his part-to-whole argument. Aristotle points out there are parts in the body that have a function, such as the heart or an eye. The eye's function is to send visual information to the brain, and the heart's function is to pump blood to all parts of the body. Aristotle states that if parts of the body have a function, then shouldn't the whole body have a function as well? He continues by saying that there would be no point for the eye to have a function if the body it was representing had no function. Now that we have discussed Aristotle's reasoning behind his function argument, I would like to include my opinion on Aristotle's argument. I disagree with Aristotle on one crucial premise, so I must conclude that I do not believe his argument to be sound. I do not agree with Aristotle on the point that the human function is rationality. I do agree that one function of a human being is rationality, but why does the function of a being have to be different from other beings? What if there was another species in the universe that had the exact same biological characteristics as us, except they were slightly faster or stronger? In this scenario, Aristotle's argument behind the function of a human being would be incorrect, because human rationality would no longer be something that differentiates us from other beings. Also, why should the function of humans be different from all other animals? Because the purpose of all other animals is to reproduce and to continue the existence of their species, then why should humans have a different function? I believe it is unwise to think that the function of one species must differ from another, because one will continue to run into issues like this, and one can never truly know if a characteristic about something is unique from the rest of the universe. Instead of using this reasoning to find the function of something, I think it would be wiser to empirically examine something to find its function. If one would like to find the function of a human, then one should examine the life of human beings. By doing this, one might ask, what does a human do that gives them a purpose in life? To answer this, one would have to examine actions of a human being that might qualify as giving them a purpose that is not a means to an end, but an end in of itself. An example of a purpose that would be a means to an end would be to run a successful business. This goal would be a means to an end because one does not run a successful business for the sake of running a successful business, but rather for a more important reason, such as providing for one's family or creating jobs for people. The only purpose I have found that would be an end in of itself would be to create the best future for one's family. Not only is it an end in of itself, but it is a purpose that continues after one dies. Another reason why this example is the best candidate for being the purpose of one's life is because one can find this purpose in all other living things. For any species to survive, they must reproduce and make sure that their offspring will survive. Without doing this, the species would no longer exist. Because reproduction and nurturing of one's offspring is the highest priority, I must conclude that this is the function of all living beings. In this video, we examined Aristotle's function argument and the details surrounding it, as well as his reasoning for his argument and my criticisms on the function argument. I do not agree with Aristotle's function argument that the function of a human being is rationality, and that eudaimonia can be achieved by having rational activity of the soul in accordance with virtue. While I do believe it vital for humans to live a life of rational activity of the soul in accordance with virtue, I believe that this is only something that should be done to achieve the main function of a human being, creating the best future for their family.